Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar. My name is Matt Lischke, Senior Ag Advisor with Local Land Services, and tonight we're going to be joined by Sue Hatcher and Phil Graham, where we will be having a look at the latest across-trial analysis from various weather trials around the state and discuss what it means for Merino producers. Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and water on which we meet tonight and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. To introduce tonight's presenters, for those of you that may not have met Sue and Phil, Sue is a livestock consultant with Makin Outcomes, a research, development and adoption consultancy based in Orange, New South Wales. And Sue previously worked in applied genetic research with the New South Wales DPI and has worked as an applied animal scientist in the Australian livestock industries for the past 30 years. Phil Graham is also a livestock consultant. Phil's based out of Yass in New South Wales, and prior to establishing Graham Advisory, Phil worked with the DPI for many years in a livestock extension role and has been heavily involved in running weather trials in the Yass region for the last 25 years. I'd also like to gratefully acknowledge Sue Mortimer from DPI RD, who played an instrumental role in collating and analysing all the weather trial data and making this project possible. So an outline of what we'll be going through this evening. So just initially an overview of weather trials in New South Wales. So a little bit of background there. And then Sue's going to launch into the latest results from the across-trial analysis. Phil will then pick up what are some of the limitations of the data and also the financial performance using some grass grow modelling. Phil will then look at how the various bloodlines stack up on an economic basis. And then Sue will finish off just discussing how you might use weather trial data in combination with other breeding tools to help make a decision on farm. So just a quick overview on weather trials in New South Wales. Locally run weather trials were likely the first form of genetic benchmarking in the merino industry. And what started out as small-scale production competitions in the 1970s, weather trials quickly became widespread, with several trials often running simultaneously across the state. Weather trials have enabled wool growers to compare and benchmark their own flock's performance and to assess the performance of bloodlines in the industry across a range of environments. Weather trials are run according to strict guidelines and whereby commercial and stud producers bring teams of wethers together to a common site where they are run for the duration of the trial, which is generally between 2 to 4 shearings. And by running the wethers as a single mob, what that does is it removes environmental and management differences between flocks, and that allows us to really home in on just comparing the underlying genetics. Production data from weather trials is collected annually from individual wethers and includes a whole range of production traits, including fibre diameter, greasy fleece weight, yield, body weight, staple length, strength, and so on. And so once we have all that production data, teams of wethers can then be ranked in order from least to most profitable. In terms of the results, there's really two levels. The results of weather trials can be accessed at the local level. And so this is just an example here of a recent report from the Glen Innes trial up on the Northern Tablelands. So that's one level. And then In addition to the local level, we also have periodically these what we call a combined analysis. And the combined analysis uses a large number of weather trials across the state over a certain time period. And on this slide here, we can see in the table the year of when these larger across trial analyses have been done. And you can see there in that table that from 1992 down to 2018, the larger across trial analyses have been done every sort of 2 to 3 years, thereabouts. Prior to this recent update, the last one was 2018. So it's been great to get this project together and really be able to do an updated across trial analysis. So in recent months, Sue Mortimer from DPIOD, Sue Hatcher and Phil have been analysing the weather trial data, and they've pulled together data from across 21 individual weather trials that were conducted between 2010 and 2025. And Sue and Phil will now walk us through those results.
So when the combined analysis was put together, we concentrated on 3 key traits. So we concentrated on fibre diameter, on clean fleece weight and live weight, because these are 3 key traits that underpin the productivity and profitability of merino sheep enterprises. So fibre diameter and clean fleece weight together contribute to wool value, and the live weight contribute to ewe reproduction and stock sales, as Phil will talk about when we talk about the financial results. So we know that highly productive merino sheep will grow heavier fleeces of finer wool, and that will increase their sheep enterprise profitability. But we also know that the decisions that commercial producers make about their choice of bloodline really sets up their flock's genetic performance. And we know that bloodlines differ in their productivity and profitability, and that's because they've got different historical development. So different foundation breeds, different geographical locations, and also different breeding policies and the way they select their sheep. And that's what contributes to the between bloodline variation. But it also gives the sort of commercial producers the opportunity to look at where their current bloodline sits and make decisions about an alternative bloodline that might improve profitability. And that's why this combined analysis is such a great tool. So what we see when we look at the sheep, so when we look at sheep in the yards or we look out across the paddock, we're seeing the phenotype. So we're seeing the result of the sheep's genotype and the impact of the environment on that genotype. So the genotype is all about the sheep's genes. It selects the performance potential of each sheep. And then the environment in which they're run, it controls what genes will be expressed and determines whether each sheep will reach its genetic potential. And so what we've done with this combined analysis is we've brought the weather trial information together, we've taken out those environmental effects, and all that's left is the genetic differences between bloodlines. So as Matt said before, the data we're talking to you about tonight is from 21 weather trials conducted over between 2009 and 2025. And where we've had bloodlines with multiple teams, both in and across the different trials, that means what creates what we call linkage. And because we can compare those bloodlines across the different, those same bloodlines across different trials and within different years in the trial, that means we can actually remove those environmental differences. And so all that's left is the genetic differences. So this table shows you the tabulated results of those bloodlines in the analysis. So if you have a look at the information on the LLS website, you can Google comparison of merino bloodlines, and you'll find this table in there. So what it shows you is each bloodline has got a code from number 1 to number 59. And then each bloodline has the performance in clean fleece weight, fibre diameter, live weight. It also shows you the number of teams, the records, and the accuracy for each one. And you can see down the bottom on the right-hand column there that the average, overall averages for those 59 bloodlines was 4.2 kilograms clean fleece weight, 19 microns, and 53.7 kilograms in live weight. So next. So what do that information tell us? So if we look at the number of teams, and if you have a look there, I've highlighted that in red, that shows you the number of teams that were entered by each of the bloodlines in the trials over that time period. So obviously it's a number of teams, what the ram breeding flock might have entered themselves or their commercial clients. The next row along, highlighted in dark blue, the next column, just shows the number of records for each bloodline. And that does include those repeated evaluations of the same sheep. So Matt told you before, some of the trials go for 4 years, and that includes repeated measures on each sheep. And so by combining the number of teams and the number of records, that gives us the accuracy. And that is determined by the standard error for clean fleece weight. So that has to be below 3%. Otherwise, we don't include the results in the analysis. So that gives us some idea of the robustness of the results. So the accuracy or the standard error for clean fleece weights based on number of teams per bloodline and also wethers per team. So the high accuracy bloodlines, which have a H, they have a fleece weight standard error of less than 2, and the mediums between 2 and 3, and anything over 3 is not reported. So it gives you confidence that the results are an accurate indication of the relative genetic performance of the bloodlines. Next. And then we plot that information. We plot the clean fleece weight and fibre diameter deviations on the chart, just like this one. And so when we look at the relative relationship between finer wool and heavier wool, or what we want is, as I said before, we want finer fleeces and we want heavier, finer fleeces. So the bloodlines in that top left-hand quadrant that I've highlighted in grey, they're the ones that combine low fibre diameter and high fleece weight. And they're, I guess, the most sort of productive and profitable bloodlines. But you can see, if we have a look at the blue arrows on the left-hand side of the chart there, that there's a 35% range between bloodlines in clean fleece weight. So I said that the average was 4.2 kilograms clean, and so the bloodlines actually vary from 4.9 down to 3.2, as I said, the 35% range. And you can see, if you look along the horizontal axis, there's a 4 micron range in the genetic performance of the bloodlines. So if we on the next one, it sort of shows you how we present the data as deviations. So for clean fleece with a live weight, we report those as a percentage deviation from the overall average. And so then, just to get back to what each bloodline is producing on a kilograms of clean fleece with a live weight basis, for clean fleece weight, you add 100 to the fleece weight percentage, divide it by 100, and then multiply that by the average, which is 4.2. And a similar calculation for live weight, just times it by the average, which is 53.7, and that gives you the kilogram performance for each bloodline. The next slide shows you that fibre diameter is simply reported as a deviation from the average. So you just add the deviation for each bloodline, add that to 19 microns, and that gives you the fibre diameter performance of each bloodline. So if we go back to the chart and have a look at the next slide, it just shows you that the change, so as well, we sort of plot them on this graph, and then we look at the sort of change in fleece weight for every 1 micron change in fibre diameter. And for clean fleece weight in particular, this relationship between fleece weight and diameter, it's quite a strong relationship. And you can see that overall, that as clean fleece weight increases, so does fibre diameter. But the rate of the change is different depending on the diameter you're looking at. So it's a strong relationship. So for finer bloodlines, those are less than 19, so less than the average, for every 1 micron change in diameter, there's a 7.7% change in fleece weight. But as you get to the broader microns, over 19 micron, that change in fleece weight is less. It's only 0.8%. And so if we have a look at the next one, it's showing you the genetic variation in fleece weight across the fibre diameter range. And this is a really important message, because what it's showing producers is you can actually make gains in fleece weight without changing diameter, and you can make gains on diameter without changing fleece weight. So if you have a look at the red lines, so if you sort of track across and you keep the red lines horizontal, that's showing you that for a range of fleece weights, you can actually, there are bloodlines out there that will produce finer wool without any change in fleece weight. But if you have a look along the length of the vertical blue lines, that's showing you the change in fleece weight with no change in fibre diameter. So this type of information is really useful, as I'll talk about later, to help you identify potential alternative bloodlines that may be able to give you more fleece weight without changing diameter, or finer wool without losing any fleece weight. So if we have a look at the relationship between live weight and fibre diameter now, so remembering before there was a 35% range in clean fleece weight, when we have a look at live weight, so if this is live weight versus fibre diameter, and the first thing you should notice is there's less variation between the individual bloodlines. So they're not as spread out as what they were for the fleece weight and diameter. And also the relationship's much flatter. So there was only a 12% range in live weight. There was a 12% range in live weight between the heaviest and the lightest bloodlines, which was only 6.8 kilograms. And for every 1 diameter change in fibre diameter, there was only a 3.6% change in live weight, which is only 2 kilograms. So there's much less variation in live weight for those changes in fibre diameter, which means that if you're looking for an alternative bloodline that's a little bit finer, you don't necessarily have to lose any live weight performance in the flock. And then when we look at live weight versus clean fleece weight, and again, there's not a lot of variation, and there's, again, not really much evidence of a trend. It's a much weaker relationship. So while the heavier fleece weight bloodlines do tend to be slightly higher, there's not a really strong relationship when we look at it from a statistical point of view. Okay, I'll finish up there and hand over to Phil.
Thanks, Sue. Look, any data that anyone produces always has error bars around it. This is no different. The thing I think you've got to look at is the Sue put up the number of teams and the number of records. Now, if we flick through that, we can have some of those bloodlines will have over 15 or 20 teams. So if there's that many teams entered from a bloodline, it's obvious that a lot of those teams have come from clients. There are some teams in there that have 2 teams. Could well be that those 2 teams came off the stud property. Now, teams off a stud property always have a genetic advantage in generation intervals. They're getting to use the sires of produce those wethers a generation or generation 2 in front of clients. So when you look at the data, I always run my eye down the number of teams and the number of records. And if I've got the bloodlines that near one another and one's got a lot more teams and a lot more records, for me, there's a bit more confidence in that data because I think it's just getting a better reflection of what's been entered. If we just have the team from one special client, we're most likely seeing the top of maybe where that one is. If we get 20 teams in there, we haven't just got the tops, we've also got some that are lower down. So it's a bit more, I think, robust. So that, I think, is one of the critical things. Limitations, there's a lot of bloodlines out there that haven't been measured because they've never been entered in trials. And the other limitation, certainly in this one, is that we're using data that's old. We're going from 2010 to 2015. That's 15 years. Ideally, we'd love that to be 8 years or 9 years. But it's been a gap since it's been done, so that's why it's a bigger period. So for some of the data is old, and Sue will talk about sort of bringing that data up to the current. So the weather trial data is giving you some solid information, but it's not giving you all the information. It's giving you a starting point. Matt talked about getting a report from the actual weather trials. If you look at those reports, you're going to find additional information which doesn't appear in the combined analysis, which is important. You'll get an idea of death rates. So as Matt said, I've run weather trials for 25 or 30 years. I remember a series of 4 trials, 4 years, 16 years, one bloodline in 16 years never lost the weather. Another bloodline in those 16 years always lost 30% of their wethers. Death rates are not often talked about, but they have an impact on the bottom line. Also, fleece rot scoring occurs on local trials. You don't see that in the combined. And fleece rot is most likely giving us an idea of how well those animals handle the environment. And if they don't handle the environment, they're going to cause us more labour and more cost. So the local trials give you additional information compared to the combined one. Now I'm going to get onto the financial. So what we've done, people say, why do you run weather trials? People hardly run weather trials anymore. People hardly run weathers. We don't run weather trials to see what the weathers are doing. We run weather trials to get us information which we can then use about what's going on in a ewe flock. Running a proper ewe comp requires a lot of animals and they just don't occur. Right? So what do we come back to? The weather trial is the cheapest way of getting quality data. And some of the work that the department did years ago. So what do? We take the data out of the weather trial that Sue showed you, and we take for the greasy fleece weight for the ewe, we take 91%. For the fibre diameter, it's 96%. The live weight we convert into a net reproductive rate. So every kilogram increase in body weight, that bloodline gets an extra 2.2 lambs. So in this work I'm just about to show you, there's a difference of about 13% in reproductive performance between the light teams and the top teams. Then the other thing about, it's the package of that data that Sue showed you that's critical for profitability. How do teams put together the fleece weight, fibre diameter, the reproductive rate and the body weight all into one? And it depends a bit on the enterprise how different bloodlines are going to rank. So what I did was create 3 different production systems. One's where we're finishing the lambs on grazing crop, and those lambs are being sold into the winter market as heavy lambs. And to do that, this is all modelling using a program called GrassGrow, which has been around for 25 years. I've used producer groups for that long. It's a very robust program at doing this sort of work. So I've used that environment in the Southwest Slopes for that system to be set up. Then we've got 2 other systems where the wethers are taken through and shorn at 15 months of age and then sold into the mutton market, or mature wethers are taken through to 4 years of age, and in that system on the right, 30% of the stocking capacity is wethers. So it's just, that's an indication of different systems that apply across, and the 2 on the right are using a tablelands environment. Next. How do I do it? Again, using GrassGrow. So what's GrassGrow do? You build up a farm system. So what did I have to do? We've got 59 bloodlines, so I had to build 59 farm systems for the lamb system, 59 farm systems for the young wethers, and 59 farm systems for the 4-year-old wethers. We use daily historical weather data. We use a typical soil for the area, a typical pasture. So the model grows pasture every day. We put the animals on. So it's a ewe flock. The only thing between each of the 59 farm systems that changes is the greasy fleece weight, the yield, fibre diameter, the live weight, and therefore the reproductive rate. They're the only 5 things that change. Everything else stays the same. Same weather, same pasture, same weather at lambing, same selling date, same prices. So we're getting the impact of those 5 production traits is what's influencing it. And the profits I'm going to show you are expressed as dollars per DSE. Why do I bring it back to a DSE basis? If we look at the lightest team and the heaviest team, and if we ran exactly the same number of ewes in those 2 systems, the heaviest team is consuming 17% more feed in a year than the lightest team. So therefore, we are not comparing apples with apples, because you don't go out and find an extra 17% of grass. So in doing this work, the stocking rate's adjusted such that the same utilisation of pasture is occurring for all the bloodlines. We're comparing apples with apples. And also, if I bring it back to $1 per DSE basis, you can be sure that you're getting a very even comparison across the bloodlines. This is the variation that's occurred. So what have we got up the left-hand side? Operating profit, dollars per DSE from one bloodline. This is run, so for each locality, I download the daily weather data for the locality from 1988 through to 2025. I run it. I ignore the data that comes out of the first 10 years, and I start recording the financial data from each bloodline between 1990 and 2024. So there's 35 years of weather data, which goes into the production system. I mean, what's the weather data do? Weather data changes pasture production, therefore it's going to change animal performance, it's going to change animal condition score, reproductive rates, lambing rates. Some of those ones we're going to have to feed drought years. So there's 35 years of yearly financial data. What I'm going to show you shortly is an average of those 35 years. So it's not been worked out on a gross margin using one set of numbers. It's putting these different animals into this production system and how do they perform over the long term. So to me, it ends up giving us the most robust way of looking at team performance. I think the Suze and myself started this work back in late August or early September. And when I first did all the runs, I used a set of prices that are at the top of your screen, what's called the average over 2 years. I sat there and thought, well, I've got to come up with some prices. I'll use the average prices from May 23 to May 25. They're those numbers in black. So I did all the work, 59 bloodlines, 3 production systems, all at that price. Then when we started putting this sort of information out, and we did a presentation for the LLS staff a couple of weeks ago, and in that I just updated a few of the teams to take account of where no prices were in November 25, because there's been a substantial change. And the feedback from the LLS staff, it'd be really good if all the data was on the November 25. So I've then gone back and redone the 59 bloodlines and the 3 farms at these prices. So they're the prices, 2 sets of prices that you're going to see the impact of as this presentation goes on. You can go to the LLS website and download, there's 3 sheets, fact sheets. This is just a snapshot out of one of the tables. So the code there is on the left-hand side, and in it, once you get the sheet, you'll see the names of the different bloodlines. And then we've got 3 columns, finished lambs, 1 production system. Young means the wethers were sold at 15 months of age. Matures, the wethers are sold at 4 years of age. What are the numbers? They're deviation in dollars per DSE. I'll show you in a minute what the average operating profit per DSE is down the bottom, and these numbers are a deviation from that. So team code with a code of 1, in the finished lamb scenario, their average was 99 cents less than the average of all the 59 bloodlines. 98 cents less in the average and $1.54 less for the mature. The next team down, $3, $5, $4 below average. Team 3, $1 above, $1.45 above, 77 above. Next. Now I've jumped to the bottom of the table. So you can just see I've missed out the middle ones. A few more teams here that have got positive figures. Then you'll see the average dollars per DSE. So that worked out, and these are the November 25 prices. 54.55 for the finished lambs, 45 for the young ones, and 42.68. This work was not set up to compare those 3 production systems. So don't take the conclusion that the finished lambs are more profitable than the other ones. You're looking just purely within each column. As I said before, no matter who does work and what work they do, there is always error bars around any work. And the standard error is my way of trying to give you an idea of what's the size of the difference you're looking for between bloodlines to have some confidence that it's a true difference. And that you can see the 3 numbers, $2.73, $2.25, $2.13. So if you're looking at 2 bloodlines, they've got to be greater than those numbers down there. So if we look at team 50 and team 58 and 50, plus $1.46 minus $1.50 we're at just about at $3 there. Standard there is $2.73. So those two bloodlines, the gap is getting to the point where you start having confidence that we're seeing a difference. A lot of the bloodlines will end up falling within what I call the standard error. And from this work, you can't with any great confidence say this one is better than that one. And to some degree, that doesn't surprise me. I've been involved in this industry now for about 40 years. I've spoken to a lot of stud breeders in that time. A lot of them will bring in outside size, and the vast majority of cases when they bring outside size in, the comment is, I really didn't get that much out of it. Which is really saying that the difference between a lot of the bloodlines aren't massive, which is really what this data is tending to show. Just before I go on, I think there's one thing we need to say. There's 59 bloodlines that had enough data for us to analyse. The average of this work, it is my view, is higher than the industry average. Be a lot of bloodlines out there that have never been looked at, and their production data is most likely sitting lower than what we're seeing on this table. I'm very confident that we have some of the tops of the industry in this data set. I think there's no question about that. We would have a lot more, there would be a lot more teams lower down. And if we had a whole industry data set where the deviation, the average would be lower. So it's a case of how do you quickly get a view of what's going on. There was the tables to look at, whether you want to scan down that. This is just giving you the same data. It's the same data out of the table. This is just for the finished lambs. On the left-hand side, it's the deviation from the mean in dollars per DSE again. And across the x-axis is the bloodline code. So we start on team number 1 on the left-hand side and we finish on team number 9 on the right-hand side. So you can quickly duck across. If we look at the team that's sitting at the bottom, we go down, it's minus $4.50, and it happens to be team 48, and team 49, the one next to it, is one of the teams that's performing the best in terms of nearly $2.50 deviation in this finished lamb. So that is just to allow you scan and quickly see where teams sit relative to one another. Sue often presents it in a different form. I look at it slightly differently. Doesn't matter. It's the same data. That's there for you to quickly assess where your bloodline might be on that. You might be looking at, can I make improvements? That's giving you some idea of what numbers do I go and look at. Next. This is still for the finished lambs. And what I'm going to do now is just go, the financial performance is always going to be down the bottom. So this is the November 25 prices, dollars per DSE, exactly the same as everything else we've been showing. I'm just going to go through 3 of the major traits: clean fleece weight, fibre diameter, and body weight, and just look at the relationship. And what we're looking at here, what trait, is there a single trait that gives us a bigger clue about what's driving the final result, the profit down the bottom? And for these finished lambs, the trait that had the greatest influence was, in fact, clean fleece weight. And at the top of the screen in the middle, there's an R squared equals 0.23. So the R squared is how tightly those lines end up around that dotted line, how closely the dots end up around that dotted line. If all of the dots were on the dotted line, you'd have an R squared of 1. We'll see some R squared figures in a minute which show there's no relationship. So that's a bit of a relationship, right? So clean fleece weight is the thing that gave us best indicator, maybe not the total indicator, of the 3 traits. Next. Body weight. There's an R squared of 0.003. In other words, there is absolutely no relationship whatsoever. The interesting thing with body weight is that in this work is a combination of weight of progeny. Heavier the animal, the heavier the weight of the progeny for sale. And because the weight also drove reproductive performance, the heavier teams have got heavier animals and higher reproductive performance. So this is combining reproductive performance and weight together, and it's really given us no relationship whatsoever to the final financial outcome, which I think a lot of people find surprising, but that's what the data's saying. Next one. Fibre diameter on the left, dollars down the bottom, and again, the R squared is 0.02, no relationship whatsoever. So fibre diameter is not giving us any clue. We can go to any fibre diameter you like, and there's a whole range of financial performances that come from that. So that's the finished lamb one. The next one, Matt, which we start on the young wethers. So again, same format as before. This is the one you go on to and quickly try to identify bloodlines. Sorry to pick on 48 and 49, but again, 48 was down the bottom in the finished lamb. It's down the bottom in this young wether one. And 49 did very well in the finished lamb scenario. It's also up there in this where the wethers are taking through to 15 months of age. But in fact, 21's maybe jumped higher than 49. So 21 wasn't showing up. It was most likely up there, but it wasn't quite as high. So we changed the enterprise. This bloodline's done a bit better because of just the nature of its production traits and how things come together. Let's now look at within the young wethers what happens. Clean fleece weight again. Again, the R squared 0.11, nowhere near as strong as it was for the finished lambs, but still it is the highest relationship. The actual size of the numbers down the bottom have dropped a bit because the average gross margin, the average operating profit for the young animals was a bit lower, but it's the same principle. Next. Fibre diameter. The R squared this time's 0.1. So the R squared for fibre diameter and fleece weight in this young wether situation is of about equal importance. The one issue we have is that, as we know, it's the combination of fleece weight and fibre diameter that drives wool value. And in this work, we're trying to separate those two. If we, in fact, plotted wool value against the dollars per DSE down the bottom, we'd find a much, much stronger relationship. It's just you have to do a bit more calculation to do it. It can get a bit messy. But that explains why some of these relationships are maybe smaller than people think, because we've taken something that really works in unison and we've split it in half. Next. Here's our body weight again. So that's weight of animals being sold, but also reproductive performance. And again, the R squared 0.00, no relationship whatsoever. So body weight is not going to give you any clues about how profitable this sort of enterprise is going to be. Next, please. Now we're into the mature wethers. Same as before, it just enables you to get a quick snapshot of how each bloodline's done relative to the others. And again, you can go, this information will be on the LLS website. You can download it, look at it at your leisure. Thanks, Matt. Now again, with this mature, we'll just go through it again. Our dear friend clean fleece weight, R squared back up to 2.5. So without doubt, across the three production systems, clean fleece weight has been the strongest indicator of where the bloodlines end up on overall performance. Next, please. And this one surprised me, but that's what the data is. In fact, body weight has jumped up on this one, on the 4-year wethers. There's no relationship on the 15-month one. Where we're running the wethers out to 4 years of age, we've had a kick up in the relationship 0.11. And then I don't know that I don't think I even put the fibre diameter in. No, the fibre diameter in that 4 years just didn't rate, so I didn't do it. So that's just giving you some idea of particular production traits and how they relate to the dollar result at the end. Next. These are the prices I showed you before. As I said, I did the work initially with those top set of prices. Then I redid all the work with those second set of prices. What I'm going to show you now is just how the bloodlines rank across those two different price sets. So we'll go straight into it. We'll start off on the finished lambs again. So down the bottom is the dollars per DSE using the prices from May 23 to May 25 averaged. So you can see the actual values are a lot less, half of what they are using the November prices, which are on the left-hand side. And we get a relationship which I found interesting, but it's right. They're virtually sitting on the line. So we've got an R squared of 0.91, and it's incredibly rare that you see R squareds that strong. So what's this saying is that regardless of price, the bloodlines have ranked very similar. It hasn't changed. So if we go down to the very bottom left-hand corner, there's a dot down there. It was the lowest in the 2-year average prices, and it's the lowest in the November prices. So that, in fact, is the outcome we really want, because it means in this production system, you can look at this data and it's still going to be relevant in 3 months' time and 6 months' time and 9 months' time. Price hasn't caused the rankings to go all over the shop. They're very tight. So that's actually a good outcome. I did not expect in any way for that relationship to be as tight as it was on the lamb system. Next. Same data for the young wether, sold at 15 months of age. The original set of prices are down the bottom. The November price is up the left-hand side. That's always the way it'll be. R squared of 0.79, close enough to 0.8. Again, very strong, but a bit more variation. The interesting thing, as wool becomes more important in the production system, changes in micron premium. So the relative you're being paid between 16 or 17 or 17 or 18. But if they start changing, that can tend to cause wool ones to bounce around a bit, which is why they aren't quite as uniform. In that the meat one, it's a more sizable component is going to meat, and it provides some stability in pricing. But anyhow, it's still the same. The rankings don't radically change. You don't get teams going from the top to the bottom. You'll get teams which are very close to each other bouncing around, but they're so close to each other that we really can't split them up anyhow. The last one, Matt. The mature wethers, R squared a point, just about the same. Same comment. And as I said, it's really the outcome. It just gives us confidence that this data has a bit of longevity to it and doesn't have to be updated every 6 months. Next. I then just want to look at the relative contribution of wool and sheep meat to the profit. You'll often hear people talking about, percentage. How much of my income am I getting from wool or from lamb? I actually did some work with a third set of prices, which I'm not going to talk about. So they're what's under the heading of high prices. So I just want you to ignore those 3 columns and let's just look at the column low price. So again, we'll start on the lamb finishing low price. So what I did was pulled out, averaged the top 5 teams, and I averaged the bottom 5 teams and just had a look at what was the difference between the different products we sell out of those systems. So you can see the top 5, 51% of the income came from wool, 41 from young sheep and castrated sheep, 8%. Down the bottom, 44 from wool, 48 from young sheep and 8% from castrated. So that's what it is. If we go over to the wether enterprise and the wether, whether it's mature or yearling, we often called it 15 months. Very similar, 61%, young sheep 31 and 9 for the mature wether. For the top performers, again, 61%, 24. Now the reason that there's a difference in young sheep in the mature wether one, we're selling those old wethers at 4 years of age, and their income falls into the cast for age group. So you're not selling as many young sheep. There are some young surplus wethers we sell as weaners, and that's why the sale varies between those two. But if you put those two numbers together, it's 60% coming from wool and 40% coming from the meat side. As soon as we drop down to the bottom group, the amount of money from wool goes down, the value of the young sheep goes up. So that's in the old prices. Next, Matt. I think this one's a bit more important. Now, this is November 25 prices. It's the lambs, finished lamb ones. So we've got total income. This is dollars per hectare. Total income from wool, total income from the sale of cast-for-age animals, total income from the sale of young animals. That's the finished wethers and the surplus ewe hoggets. And then expressing those three things as a percentage. If we just quickly look at the very last column, sales percentage. We run down the 4 in blue, so they average 47%. We run down the ones underneath from the bottom 5, let's say they average 51%, 4% difference. Now let's go to the middle column, which is sale dollars. So we've got 5 numbers in black and we've got 5 numbers in red. If you average the income from those 5 red animals, the average sale income in dollars per hectare is greater for the bottom 5 teams. Their income is greater than the income from the top 5 teams. They produced more income, outright income, from the sale of animals than the top teams. But overall, they are at the bottom of the list in terms of overall performance. And where did they fall down? We look at the wool income column. They were giving away over, varies a bit, let's say $100 a hectare in wool income. So their total income was down. And when you express the sale income over a smaller number, your percentage goes up. So I hear people talk a lot about their percentage being at 60 and 65% sale of income coming from sale of animals. That could well be because over the years they've let full production drop right away. So it's a very high percentage, but it's not necessarily meaning that their overall income, you live and die on that first column, on your total income. You don't live or die on your percentage. So maybe we just need to be careful about what figures we look at in things like this. Next. Things to consider. Now, there was, based on live weight, we did change marking percentages between bloodlines. There are some bloodlines in the industry which I would say have reproductive performance which is greater than sort of the industry average. In doing this work, that sort of performance hasn't been taken account of. There's not many, and I don't think their performance is massively different. So if I increase reproductive performance by an extra 4%, so they had a 16% advantage, it added about $2 to their DSE figure. So the average was 55. So $2 over 55, it's not a massive change. I think the one thing, a lot of people will look at this variation, A, in body weight and B, in reproductive performance and think, oh no, it's a lot bigger in industry. It's a lot bigger in industry because of all those environmental impacts we have. You've got to remember from this reproduction point of view, the ewes are being managed to the same fat scores during the year. Weather conditions are exactly the same as lambing. So we take a lot of that noise out of. Now, over the years in my job, I've lambed different bloodlines down on the one property in the same paddock. And the one thing I always got out of that was that the difference in reproductive performance between bloodlines is not as big as we would expect when we just hear numbers being put out there. And I thought one of the classics of that was recently some colleagues of mine from the department published a paper where they got 7 million reproductive records from scanning operators over many years, over many properties, a massive data set, 7 million. The interesting thing was that the highest reproductive performance was achieved from Merino ewes rather than crossbred ewes. Now, if we did a survey of the people on the hookup tonight, I'm sure 99.9% would say crossbred ewes will always have a higher reproductive performance than Merinos. But the data set of 7 million data sets did not agree to that. So often what we see in industry in terms of reproductive performance and what really occurs when you put everything under the same conditions, the variation is nowhere near as great as it is. And I think that's me, Matt.
Thanks, Phil. I'll pass back to Sue now, and just to talk through how you might use weather trial data in combination with other breeding tools. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Matt. So when we start thinking about our genetic benchmarking performance, we again think about the income from a merino enterprise. So as Phil's talked about then, it's about determined by the weighted wool produced per hectare, the price received for the wool clip, the number of surplus sheep sold, and the price you receive from selling surplus lambs and older stock. And all of those income categories are determined by the genetic makeup of the flock, which, as I said before, is determined largely by the bloodline choice you make, and then by the breeding decisions you make and how you manage the flock. So when we talk about genetic benchmarking, it's about comparing the performance of your flock to an industry standard. So the first step to doing that is to benchmark your performance as like a 5-step process. So first of all, we have to think about the breeding objective, which sets a long-term goal for your flock. We then need to benchmark the current flock performance, and what we've talked about today with the weather trial information is a really good first step to do that. It's really important to consider all traits in your breeding objective, and then think about, once you've done all that, once you've thought about that, is you want to think about the current performance of any alternative bloodline you've identified. And then also think about any constraints to making a change, which I'll talk about shortly. So the first thing is to really set up your breeding objective. So your breeding objective has to be smart. It must be specific about the traits that are impacting the profitability, the productivity, costs or incomes of your specific situation. You have to be able to measure what you're looking to gain. So you need to be able to, you could look for measurable increases in the key traits. It has to be achievable. So we need to understand for each trait what can be achieved, what sort of change is likely over time. It has to be relevant to your particular production system. It has to be really focused on results, because your breeding objective is sort of setting you that goal you want to go towards. So the more specific is focused on results and within a timely time frame, it really helps you set up that sort of goal, that long-term target for your flock. And the breeding objective is going to be different. You can be a neighbour with someone, a similar production environment, similar bloodline, but the breeding objective is likely to be different because it's based on the setup of your enterprise and of what your assessment of the future market value for wool and sheep meat is. So it's really important for your breeding objective to be balanced. Next one, Matt. So looking at including traits that impact on income and profit. So wool production and quality, sheep sales, weight, reproduction impacting on income, and things like feed requirements, labour requirements, disease, conformation impacting on costs. So we've sort of talked about tonight that the weather trial information talking about tonight is really focusing on fleece weight, diameter and live weight. But you can go back to the individual trial information, as Phil said before and Matt said before, and you can actually pick up some of the other information about the bloodlines as well. So if we have a look at the next slide, it really gives you a really good indication of really working out where you are now and where you might want to go into the future. So if you can find your bloodline you're on now and map it onto the chart that you'll find on the website. And then you can say, okay, well, here I am. So what do I want to do? So I might want to stay in terms of fleece weight, but I might want to go a little bit finer. So if you map your current spot, and I've mapped 3 different spots there, pick 3 different alternatives, and you can see that for each of those, if you want to go finer but maintain your fleece weight, you just follow that dark blue line and put a lot of selection pressure on reducing diameter. If you're happy with the diameter that you're at the moment and you want to grow more fleece weight per head, then you just can go up and follow the red line. And again, you can see that for each of the different spots I've mapped there are alternative bloodlines that for a given fibre diameter will have higher fleece weight. Or you might decide that for your breeding objective, you want to make gains in fleece weight and fibre diameter at the same time. And for that case, you'll follow those light blue lines. So this package of information is a really good tool to work out where you are now and then look, okay, where do I want to go? What do I want to make a change? And that helps you identify those alternative bloodlines you might go and find more information about. So once you have identified your alternative bloodlines, you can then go to the financial performance information on the website, look at what the information Phil's just presented, and really start looking at that relative financial performance of the bloodline. But it's really important to think about all the traits in your breeding objective and their relative importance. Depending on where you're located, things like worm resistance might be an issue for you. Reproduction, lamb survival, it might be some conformation traits. It might be looking at breech wrinkle or breech cover. So it's really about, for your particular production system, for your farm, to think about all the traits and their relative importance to you, because that's going to differ from property to property. So if we have a look at the next slide, thinking about the current performance. So as Phil said before, there's this 5 to 15 year lag between the results we've shown you tonight and the current performance of each of the bloodlines in the analysis. So the information we've talked to you tonight, it's really your first step. It's one way of looking at where your current bloodline sits compared to the distribution of others. But we have to start, that's the first step. You need to actually do more work, as Phil said before. So it's really important to seek further information from the alternative bloodlines. You might have picked 2 or 3, so go to each of them, ask them, what's your breeding objective? Has it changed in the last 5 to 10 years? How do you select your sheep? How do you manage them? Has that changed in the last 5 to 10 years? What sort of genetic progress have you made, and where are you currently sitting now? And really importantly, ask them about their breeding objective and where they want to go in the next 10 years, and make sure that aligns with where you want to take your own flock as well. And another really key point is, once you've sorted that information, is think about the practicalities of making a change. So think about the availability and the price of the rams. Does the alternative bloodline have enough rams that you need to bolster your ram team? And is it at a price you're prepared to pay? Also think about when their rams are available. So when their availability of their rams, does that match your time of joining? And really make sure we know you need to acclimatise your rams. So if they're coming from a similar environment, maybe 10 or so weeks, you want them on your property to get used to the feed and the environment. But if they're coming from a completely different production system, hotter, colder, you're going to need to acclimatise them longer to make sure that when you put them in with the ewes, they've got good sperm production and they're ready to work for you. So we know at least 8 weeks is what it takes for spermatogenesis to form, and you want to do those pre-joining checks. So really understanding when their rams are available relative to when you want them on farm to check and get them ready to put out with the ewes is really important. The distance from your farm, like how far is it you're going to drive to look at the rams, to purchase them, to transport them home. And really importantly, the availability of supporting information. So do the rams provide, does the bloodline provide ASBVs to help you rank the rams that are available for them, and any other information that will help you make your selection decision. So these practicalities can really have a big influence on your selection of a bloodline, particularly when you've got different bloodlines under consideration. So I'll just sort of finish up here and then we'll open up for questions. So this is just showing you, I guess, the relative performance or the relative value of the different sort of genetic tools that we have out there. So you can see down the bottom in the grey, we've got things like, flock ewe competitions, on-farm trials, or comparative benchmarking groups. And that's when producers get together to sort of consider their relative performance. But what we find with those sort of, they tend to only evaluate a few number of bloodlines, and all that is reliable is accurate for genetic benchmarking. So when we started tonight, Matt talked to you about weather trials, how the local weather trials, they give you a really good indication of the bloodlines and their performance in your local area. But again, they're really, generally a limited number of bloodlines, and it's not really applicable if you're a long way from that local area. And that's where what we've talked about tonight, this comparison of bloodlines, pooling the weather trials, it increases the number of bloodlines being evaluated and also increases their accuracy. So as I said, that's like your sort of first step into genetic benchmarking. And then we go up to the Merino sire evaluation sites where we had the progeny testing. So we had that at different sites around Australia. And that shows you the relative performance of Merino sires for a whole range of characteristics and traits. And then each of those individual Merino sire evaluation, other breeders' data goes into Merino SLEP, which is really the gold standard for genetic evaluation. So from that, that's where we get the Australian sheep breeding values, and you can use that once you've chosen your bloodline to have a look at which rams to use in your property. And then there's a couple of other industry tools, Ram Select, which is just ways that you can sort of track the genetic performance of your ram team over time, and also you can do some flock profiling to benchmark as well. So you can see that where the comparison of bloodlines sort of fits in with other genetic benchmarking tools, and it's a really good first step to sort of make that journey to start thinking about where the current performance of my bloodline is now and what are the alternatives to make change into the future to increase the productivity and profitability of your flock.
Thanks, Sue. That's great. Thank you. I'll just stop sharing my screen, and we do have a bit of time for questions. So I'll just see if there's been any questions typed into the Q&A box. So we haven't got anything posted as yet. So I'll just give people a few minutes just to have a think about if they'd like to reach out to Sue or Phil and ask a question. I might start with one, Phil, and it's quite interesting at the moment. We're really enjoying very strong meat prices, and the red meat outlook is certainly looking very positive at the moment. And I suppose there could be a risk for merino producers to think, the meat side of things is so strong, I doesn't worry too much about wool. But after going through your presentations and really some of those key messages around, wool versus meat and what's really contributing, I guess one of the messages that I'm getting from it is that despite the high meat prices, it's still really important to keep a strong focus on wool. Is that a fair call?
Thanks, Matt. Talking himself. Yeah, look, we forget that to have wethers to sell into the meat market, we've got to have ewes to produce them. And we've got to have replacement ewes to keep that flock as a self-replacing flock. All those animals are producing wool. And if we just forget about that, there's a large cohort of our flock, we just let our profitability drop. I think it's fair to say no one at present can afford to throw money away. Things are tight. And you really need each component of the production traits working for you, not one of them. And that's really what this data shows. The teams that are on the top are on the top because they've got the wool production, the animals, they can finish animals. One of the great things about merinos and meat, I've seen it for years, how do you want, if you feed a merino like a crossbred ewe, you'll be surprised how fast they grow. And if you put all the merinos on similar country, you'll be surprised how close they are in growth rates. So there's everyone has that potential to do a good job. Often the meat production, the poorer meat production comes when we just don't feed them well enough, or your country hasn't got the capability of doing it. So yes, you can't forget about one critical thing. I think that's slightly what's happened in Western Australia. They've worked on the live sheep trade for so long, and they've just forgotten about wool. Now that trade it's like coming to a halt, they're looking at the wool side and say, oh, geez, that's fallen away. Why am I running sheep? Whereas if they'd kept the sheep, the wool production up, they might have had a different attitude now.
Thanks, Phil. Well, there's no further questions coming through. Do you have any further comments, Sue?
No, not from me, just other than sort of reiterating that, this information is really a good first step for people to start considering a bloodline choice. And then you really need to sort of go on and do your homework from there so that, do that further investigating, ask the studs questions and sort of find out their current performance. Because as we've shown you, there are really big gains to be made just by making a change to your bloodline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt, I might just finish with a little example. A lot of years ago, same weather trial in Yass, Sean for 4 years, and one producer used to come up to me at the end of each year and tell me in no uncertain terms what a lousy job I did running the weather trial, because his sheep at home were 15 micron sheep, and in the weather trial they were 17.5 micron sheep. And he took nothing out of the trial. He didn't worry about some bloodlines in that trial were 1.5 microns finer and cutting heavier fleece. Another person in the trial who actually came last, I thought they might be a bit sensitive, came up to me and said, "Isn't this wonderful news?" I said, "That's not the answer I was expecting." They said, "Finances at home aren't that brilliant. And if we came out on top, I might as well have sold the farm. I'm at the bottom. I can see the bloodlines that are going to be productive for me." He changed his bloodline. By the time the next weather trial came along, he entered a team of 50% of the new genetics in the team was just selected those group, and he ending up in the middle of the trial. He now still puts teams in weather trials, and he's now in the top 25%. First person who kept telling me that I can't run a weather trial, I think they were out of the industry in 10 years after that weather trial finished.
Yeah, it's powerful data, and I know that getting a first-hand look at some of the weather trial data, it always amazed me at the differential between the teams in terms of production and the capacity to generate income. And I guess that's one of the tools, isn't it, at the moment with this ever increasing cost of production. As producers, we don't have too many levers that we can pull, but genetics and running more, sheep that can more efficiently convert grass into dollars is one way that we can try and maintain profitability.
It is, and then at the end of the day, you decide the direction you want. All this data is giving you is some hard data to help you go down the pathway you want to go down. And if you go down that pathway, just do it well.
All right. Well, there hasn't been any questions come through, so we might draw it to a close. If this webinar has created any interest from people about weather trials locally, I guess like to encourage you to reach out to local land services staff and just to see what weather trials might be running locally, because there are various weather trials being run around the state, and so yeah, just reach out to your local LLS people and to see what might be around in your neck of the woods.
I just saw a question pop up from Alistair about stocking rate. Alistair, was that the stocking rate that trial? I ran those 3 systems on good productive farms in the district, so they were being run at stocking rates in the order of 11.5, 12.5 DSE. It was about those numbers. The finished lamb one was a bit higher than the other ones, but they were around that sort of number.
I think the question might be also around what stocking rate are the actual physical weather trials run at, Phil?
It'll be run by whatever the property that they end up being hosted on. That person will run them like they run their existing sheep. So the weather trials around here, those weathers would certainly be running at somewhere between, will depend on properties a bit, but they'll be running between 10 and 15 DSE to the hectare.
Alrighty. Well, big thanks to Sue and Phil for your time tonight and everyone for tuning in. Hope you found the webinar informative. The webinar has been recorded, so if you'd like to go back and have a closer look at things, it's there for you. And as previously mentioned, the information will be available on the LLS website as well. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and yeah, all the best.